Hi, my name's Alexa, and I will be discussing jazz as a Kansas City subculture. When I think of Kansas City, I think of jazz. I can hear the rich sounds of a saxophone, the strength of a trumpet being blown, and the deep tones of the bass. Jazz became an important part of Kansas City culture during the 1920s. We will be discussing what jazz is, the history of jazz, which includes the rise and fall, the political factors, the revamping, and how jazz influences Kansas City today. What is jazz? Collins' dictionary defines jazz as a music form that is from African American descent. It is characterized by syncopation, which is when a rhythm isn't on beat, it's on an offbeat. It's also characterized by improvisations, which is when musicians just go with the flow and make up stuff as it comes to them. Harmonic idioms, which are short chord progressions, and instrumental techniques. An anecdote that gives a feel of what jazz is would be one that is described in the Encyclopedia of Urban Legends, and it's an encounter between a woman and Louis Armstrong, who is considered to be the father of jazz. So the woman asks Armstrong, "What is jazz?" And his response was, "If you don't know, you ain't got it." And that just means that jazz is a feeling. It's not something that can be defined. It's just the experience you have when you go into a nightclub or a bar that's playing jazz music. It's just what you feel. So what is Kansas City style jazz? According to the Dictionary of Historical Jazz, the Historical Dictionary of Jazz, Kansas City jazz is defined as a style of jazz that has many different variations of jazz in it. And some things that are unique to Kansas City jazz is the jam sessions and territory bands. So jam sessions are basically when musicians or bands are done with their sets, they'll just start using improvisation to make up new songs, and this can last all day, all night, till the next day, and they could still be going, and it's just a great way to experience how jazz is created. Territory bands are when bands have a specific territory and they play in that territory, and in order to play at a different territory that's not their own, they have to give permission to the person who wants to get permission from the territory that they want to perform in. And you see a lot of this during jazz because Kansas City was considered the mecca of jazz, so there's a lot of people coming in wanting to play here. So they had to do that so nobody's toes would get stepped on. So jazz came to Kansas City during the 1920s, and it started to flourish during the 1930s. And this was a time where segregation was still strong, and so all the jazz scene was on the African American side of the segregation line. And so that's where you would see everything and have those experiences. Jazz was also during the Prohibition era, and this was stated by Nathan Pearson, who is the author of Political and Musical influences that developed Kansas City jazz, and he just talks about how Kansas City was called the Open Wide because there were so many bars and clubs there, and Kansas City was not following any of the prohibition laws. So there was alcohol in every place you can think of in this area of 18th and Vine and 12th Street. Along with prohibition, the person who was the political force behind Kansas City and the jazz scene was Thomas Pendergast. And he was the reason why Kansas City didn't follow the prohibition laws. And once he was thrown in jail for not with not conferring and following the prohibition laws, there's also prostitution and other violences going on in 18th and Vine. So he went to prison for that. And once that happened, the jazz scene in the 1940s started to fizzle out. Bars and nightclubs were closing, which caused the businesses in the area to close as well. During the 1950s, according to Frank Driggs, the author of Kansas City Jazz from Ragtime to Bebop, A History, states that another reason why jazz declined in Kansas City was because rock and roll became really popular, as well as the urban renewal, which took all the bars out of 12th Street. So Kansas City started to revamp during the 1980s. And during that time, Emmanuel Cleaver, who was a councilman at the time, got the city of Kansas City to agree to start revamping 18th and Vine through refurbishing the Gym Theater, which was a prominent part of 18th and Vine during the height of jazz, as well as creating the American Jazz Museum, which was established in 1997. And now today, the 18th and Vine district is a historic district, and it houses, along with the American Jazz Museum, the Juke House, the Blue Room, and not too far off from that is the Mutual Musicians Foundation, where is a great place to go if you would like to experience what a jam session would have been like during the 1920s and 1930s. And there's also free events that the American Jazz Museum holds, and they also have a Kansas City Jazz and Heritage Festival, which I went to, and I had a really great time, and it was just great to see how jazz is still part of Kansas City culture. So other reasons why jazz still influences Kansas City today is because at these events and at these places that I've mentioned, you see all different age groups, you see different people from different backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses, and they just can come together and enjoy the music that they love. As part of this speech, I went to the American Jazz Museum because it's been a while since I went, and I would highly recommend people go. There is this one part that was interactive. You get to sit down and listen to different music that was played and made during the height of jazz, and you can also see prominent leaders of jazz in there, like Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, who's a Kansas City native, as well as Louis Armstrong, and just other people who made Kansas City jazz what it was. Thank you, and have a great night.